Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man who is dressed up like a heart attack for you. Here is the captain.
It's good to be seen and good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
We are still moving our way through some delicious, it's like a dessert in a pint glass. This is Moonlit Imperial Stout. This is chocolate and coffee and not too boozy. Actually, not boozy at all. Because of the heat, though, I did chill this one overnight in the fridge. Garage grade, 4 out of 5 bottle caps. And here are some folks that just might be drinking at home in their garage as I speak. First up, we have Robert Maxwell in beautiful Louisville, Kentucky.
And a big We Like Jib goes out to Jenny from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Next, here's a cheers to May in the heart of it all, Columbus, Ohio.
Tall cans in the air to Melissa from Philadelphia. Fly, Eagles, fly.
And last but certainly not least, we have Christina from Parts Unknown. Everyone we just mentioned went to truecrimegarage.com, clicked on the pint glass, and helped us out with this week's beer fund for the beer run, filling up the old garage fridge. And for that, we thank you.
Yeah, BWRU and Beer Run. Hey, want to help out the show? Wherever you listen, leave a 5-star review, and we'll love you for the rest of our lives. And that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody, gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime. So I want to get into the suspects here a bit, Captain. And I guess technically at this time in our timeline that they are persons of interest. But if law enforcement were vultures, they would be circling around these two endlessly because there's so much telling them that these folks are absolutely responsible for the disappearance. Now let's figure out their level of involvement and what exactly happened here. And we did some background on these two, and here's what we found. Bailey's biological father was murdered when she was a baby, but despite this, she had a very normal upbringing by all accounts with a mom, stepdad, and grandparents who were loving and supportive. She was an excellent track and basketball athlete in high school, this in Leon, Iowa, and she was awarded a basketball scholarship to play in Des Moines, but it's unclear if she accepted this scholarship. Her family said that Bailey was a normal kid who did not get into trouble, but she was sexually assaulted in college and she got into a very physically abusive relationship. This was with a one Freddie Pannell, Pannell, that turned, and they say her folks say turned her down a very dark path. The Boswells claim that Bailey had tried to escape Freddie, even filing a restraining order against him, but prosecutors said that Bailey and Freddie were druggies. Bailey lost custody of her daughter because of her habit. She was arrested in 2016, just 1 year before Sydney went missing and was killed. This for possession of drug paraphernalia in Cameron, Missouri. At some point, she started advertising on Backpage looking for a sugar daddy, which is how she met Aubrey. The two seemed to form an unlikely pair and teamed up to steal, swindle, and defraud people at antique booths, at traveling shows, as well as their online antique store. They were together for more than a year, during which they racked up some serious charges. They were passing bad checks, including making off with $28,000 worth of rare coins. Aubrey and Bailey were believed to have been involved in between $300,000 to $500,000 in theft and bad check cases, and this spans several states.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
From the Grand Island Independent, quote, Boswell joined up with Trail, an ex-convict from Tennessee, for a life of stealing and selling antiques, visiting casinos, and engaging young women for parties and group sex, end quote. Aubrey was twice Bailey's age, probably 3 times her weight, and they made for one very strange and very evil couple. Aubrey Trail spent his teenage years in troubled environments, including a juvenile detention facility. He was incarcerated for the first time at age 17 for armed robbery and has spent most of his life incarcerated or on parole. He had done 2 prison stints for defrauding people out of valuable antiques. Normally, this would cue the captain to say that he's a piece of shit, but we covered that extensively in part 1 of this story.
I can say it again if you want. This guy's a giant piece of shit. But also, like, and I'm not trying to feel bad for any of these losers, but when you hear a story of an individual that had scholarship offers to go play a sport at a collegiate level, and then their life turns into this, you just think, man, that sucks. It sucks for her family. It sucks for her friends. It sucks for her. It sucks for everybody that basically was in the path of this destruction. I think all of this comes down, when it comes down to Bailey, is she was a drug addict and was willing to almost do anything to make sure that she could get drugs.
Well, you know, one could say her life turned into this. Another could say she turned her life
right
into this. And that from where I stand, that's kind of how I see it. Now,
I mean, these are 2 of the biggest piles of shit that have ever been on the show, and that's saying a lot.
So they're locked up, right? They're in jail awaiting charges. Aubrey is caught trying to slip Bailey notes when they're in jail. And one, he wrote, quote, "Here is your story," end quote, and told her to tell the investigators that they were paid lots of money by young women to act out killing, torture, and sex fantasies. So essentially what this story would be is that women would pay this couple to act out these different fantasies with that woman. And in some cases, it included photographing, videotaping, or recording, videotaping, I shouldn't say that, recording these acts. Now, here come the charges, though. This is both federal and state authorities. This is December of 2017. They charged them with carrying stolen merchandise valued at more than $5,000 across state lines. And Aubrey was handed over to the U.S. Marshals on a federal theft charge that he and Bailey had defrauded a Kansas couple out of $375,000 approximately in an overseas gold coin scheme, and transported the property over state lines. But charges on the Sydney Loofe case were a long time coming. The other criminal cases proceeded, and they both were facing years in prison on those cases. You know, this is a guy, if you follow this story long enough, it seems like this guy enjoyed the spotlight.
Right.
The accused killer, or would-be accused killer, sitting in the county jail, Aubrey Trail, on 3 separate occasions spoke with reporters from the Omaha World-Herald. He said he had given 3 separate statements on the Loofe case to the FBI. He admitted he expected to be charged. In fact, he asked for charges. He kept making statements like, quote, "You want justice for Sydney? Charge me," end quote. He was challenging the authorities and almost seemed like he wanted to be charged, saying, "The FBI has pulled so many hairs out of my head, I've got a bald spot." In a second recorded jailhouse phone call, Aubrey told the Omaha World-Herald that, "I told law enforcement a long time ago that I am accountable for Sydney Loofe's death. I am responsible. The girl," presumably meaning Bailey, "had nothing to do with it." And then a flat-out confession. Aubrey told reporter Paul Hamel that he accidentally suffocated Sydney to death in the basement apartment he and Bailey rented in Wilbur. Hamel's reporting states, Trail claimed that Loofe was a willing participant in a sexual fantasy with himself and at least 2 other women, but that Bailey Boswell was wiped out on drugs and outside the room when Loofe died. Aubrey seemed to want to pay for his crime. In February 2018, he told the reporter in another prison phone call that he was ready to be charged. Quote, "I'm guilty. I did it. Let's get justice for Sydney Loofe. A life for a life. I should be put to death." End quote.
Yeah, but even if you buy his stories, then Bailey is still responsible on some level. She's involved somehow.
Well, several months would go by while prosecutors gathered evidence, amassing like 500 potential witnesses, and they had to figure out where the prosecution should be handled too, because we have this detail of Sydney living in one county, in Lancaster County, and it's believed she was killed in Saline County, was disposed of in Clay County. Now, like you said prior, both of these suspects are already in jail facing other charges, so there's no real rush to try them. It's more, we have the time, so let's get this absolutely right. Let's get this perfect. In January of 2018, Aubrey entered not guilty pleas to 13 federal indictments related to stolen property. Then later, they both end up pleading guilty to charges, very similar charges. So what happens here, Captain, in 2 separate sentencing hearings, Bailey Boswell gets 5 years in prison and Aubrey Trail got 10 years. This for defrauding that Kansas couple out of nearly $400,000.
Wow.
Then from Saline County in June of 2018, this is when both Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder and abandoning a human remains. From Omaha.com, quote, "State prosecutors allege that Loofe's death was deliberate and premeditated. Among their evidence is surveillance camera footage from a Lincoln Home Depot store of Trail and Boswell buying tools and supplies, believed to have been used in the dismemberment and disposal of Loofe's body, according to court records. Sydney was strangled with an extension cord, the court documents alleged, by either Bailey or Aubrey. Either way, the prosecutors intended to pursue the death penalty for Aubrey. Court papers filed by the Nebraska Attorney General's office alleged that 2 aggravating circumstances warranted the capital punishment. This was that Aubrey had a substantial history of serious, assaultative, and terrorizing criminal activity, and that Sydney's murder was done with exceptional depravity. Another charge was soon slapped on Aubrey. This is conspiracy to commit murder. The charge alleged that he had conspired with Bailey between July and October of 2017 to solicit young women online, recruit participants in a homicide, and select a victim to murder. The 2 were casting a wide net,
right,
and Sydney fell into a trap. Aubrey pled guilty to additional charges, this of improper disposal of human remains, but on the serious charges, like the first-degree murder, he pled not guilty. But we have a trial to discuss here, Captain.
Yeah, so he pled not guilty, but he confessed to it?
No, so he pled guilty to the charge of improper disposal of human remains.
Right.
But he pleads not guilty to the more serious charges, the main one being that first-degree murder.
Right.
But this dude, and I you hear me laughing, not because I find it to be humorous, but because I find it to be exhaustingly aggravating. This dude was a serious pain in the ass during the pretrial period.
Well, he's a loser.
So, of course, his attorney filed all sorts of motions claiming his statements to police were coerced and claiming that he had an alibi. That's all normal stuff. No one cared, and those motions were all rejected.
Good.
Aubrey made claims that Sydney, the victim, was involved in the coin fraud scheme, that they had known her much longer than this short period on Tinder.
Right.
Then he claims other inmates were threatening him. So he gets placed in solitary for his own safety, to which then as soon as he's there, he promptly asks for a TV. Like, oh, can you give me a TV? The answer's no, dude. The answer's no. No TV for you. He requested special housing, saying that he had health issues. And then after a psych evaluation, Aubrey was found fit to stand trial. Then at the trial, the state had lined up, remember we had mentioned potentially 500 witnesses that they were going to call during the course of this trial. This included clerks at antique stores, clerks at motels and casinos where the pair allegedly spent a lot of money, 2 ex-wives of Trail, and dozens of law enforcement members who aided in the investigation and the search for both Sydney and for those perps. The prosecutor made sure the jury knew that Aubrey and Bailey Boswell recruited Sydney with the sole intention of murdering her simply for their entertainment and pleasure.
Yeah, they're evil animals. Do you think there's something about like prison justice? Because I've been thinking a lot about this. There's all these reports now with, Brian Kohlberger, where he gets in prison and these people are harassing him and taunting him through the vents. And obviously they have to take all this into account because these animals want to get to him. But do you think the people he's in prison with are bad people? Are they doing this to make, 2 wrongs make a right? Or is it, I think some of it has to do with if there's too much attention on a case, the people in prison somehow want to make a statement. And I think you see the same thing here. It's like, it seems like Aubrey was braggadocious and wanted to be in the spotlight and wanted to take credit for this crime and wanted these horrible details out there. But then once he gets behind bars, it seems like, the animals wanted to get him.
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, there's cases where people were placed in solitary for their own safety when it's absolutely necessary. And then there's keep in mind, my statement here was that he claimed other inmates were threatening him. We do know of other cases where an individual goes to jail and then fabricates threats that does get them placed into solitary. So,
right.
Typically a person that has this length of rap sheet is a bully, for not so much in the traditional sense, but a bully in the way of how they move and live in society. If they want something, they take it, or they steal it from you, or they defraud you out of your money. And he did all this, and it's manipulative, and it's trying to control every scenario and find a way to benefit in any scenario that you're placed into, whether you actually deserve to benefit or have done any real work to achieve a higher status or a better position in your situation. So it's, right. I mean, as far as this shit goes, I don't put a whole lot of thought into this. My drive for true crime is always the investigations. And how do we figure out who's responsible for this? And then how do we apprehend them? That to me is the stuff that I find intriguing. That's the stuff that's what the smart, good people are doing, strategizing and learning and educating themselves on to do. Once a Aubrey gets put into jail with a whole bunch of other guilty people,
the wild things.
It could be Lord of the Flies for all I care. I don't, that's, they're not part of my society. They're not, I actually pay taxes to make sure that they are not. So however they sort it out in there, that's up to them.
Is it bad that there's a part of me that likes the monsters threatening and scaring the boogeyman? Because in all these cases, that person, Brian Kohlberger, becomes the boogeyman, but not once he's behind bars. He
No,
becomes the
it's
prey.
human nature. It would be weird if you didn't, because it's
Because I like
look,
it. I probably
when
like it
people
more than I should.
when people do stuff as heinous and hurtful and heartless and soulless as the crimes that we are regularly discussing on this show, it is not, it doesn't ever sit well to just go, oh, well, they did all this horrible shit and now they're essentially getting a 25-year long timeout. It's just not,
Yeah.
there's nothing that feels good about that punishment. One of the things that and this was a good strategic move by the prosecutor. I like to, because they spend so much time focusing on how they present things and the words that they choose to use in the delivery of those words to the jury. And one thing he told the jury was that they go into detail about when Bailey picked Sydney up, using the ruse about a date with Bailey, pointing out that these two were already prepared with everything that they needed to kill, dismember, and dispose. And he goes on to tell the jury that the two were hoping and planning to murder someone, anyone, for months. He told the jury, quote, "This was not a sexual fantasy gone wrong, but a premeditated murder gone right." The other prosecutor here was from the Nebraska Attorney General's office, who took up from there. She said, "This is more than first-degree murder. This was a planned abduction to kill Sydney Loofe." Then describing in painstaking detail how Sydney was dismembered. At this point, Sydney's sister and father left the courtroom. The prosecutor, she threw in that Sydney's internal organs, some of them were never found. And in Aubrey's interview, he had only said vaguely that they had drained her blood because he was very thirsty that day. Now, this was a tactic. This tactic by the prosecutors was deliberate, because remember, Aubrey pled guilty pre-trial to the improper disposal of human remains. That was a tactic that was designed to avoid showing the horrific images of the dismembered body to the jury. So the thought was, if he's already guilty of improper disposal of human remains, that can't work its way into this trial.
Right.
By talking about the autopsy and Aubrey's, air quotes, confession, the prosecution managed to get them in the trial deliberately to horrify the jury. Astonishingly, Aubrey managed to slip a razor blade into court and tried to take his own life right there in front of the jury. He slashed his throat and yelled, "Bailey is innocent and I curse you all." Now, he lived, but blood had to be cleaned up off of the courtroom floor, and the judge refused to declare a mistrial, ruling that Aubrey's act of self-harm was, quote, "a calculated gesture resulting in superficial cuts." The trial continued in Aubrey's absence as he recovered in the hospital.
All right, we are back. Make sure you check out Off the Record. Only if you're nasty. Cheers to you, and talk hands in the air to you, my friend.
Well, you could check it out if you are not currently nasty, but desire to be nasty,
want to be.
because you will become nasty in the most beautiful of ways. That's so for new listeners. Off the Record is our subscription show, available on Patreon and Apple subscription, and you'll get dozens and dozens of shows of Off the Record. We've been recording them for a long time, and you even get our first 50 episodes and some other bonus episodes that we've done throughout the year. So,
And they're not that good.
A lot of stuff. Well, way to sell it to the people there.
Well, you can see how the show started and how it has grown. But let's get back to these shit bags of the year.
Yeah, so we have a forensic anthropologist from Mississippi, Stephen Symes, who is going to be testifying on behalf of the prosecution to discuss at length the brutal death and the suffering of the victim, as well as the barbaric treatment of the body, and telling jurors that a saw, a knife, and scissor-like tools were used to dismember the body. Remember, tin snips and some other items. We talked about the grocery list of items that were purchased at the hardware store. This from Omaha.com. Quote, Symes, who said he specializes in cases of body dismemberment, examined Loofe's remains on December 13, 2017. He used a model of a skeleton at times to show jurors how Loofe's body was cut up. He said it appeared from the characteristics of the cuts that a knife was used to remove flesh and then a saw was used to cut through the bones with several false start cuts. A scissors-like tool, like tin snips, was used on the rib area, he said. And then there were the witnesses to the premeditated nature of the crime. This is something you don't often see in murder case trials at all. So we get 3 female witnesses who had lived or spent time with this terrible couple before Sydney's murder.
Right.
So these 3 different ladies, they testified that the pair often talked about torturing and killing someone. Their reasons to kill: witchcraft. Aubrey claimed he could fly and that he was a vampire and that he had a harem of witches, not the good kind, Glinda. These women all told the jury that they, just like Sydney, met Bailey on Tinder. Once they met in person, she introduces them to her sugar daddy, Aubrey. They coerce them into group sex and bondage activities in exchange for financial assistance, like a weekly allowance. Now, I think a key here is that none of these 3 women, it should be noted, none of them ever testified that they had experienced choking as part of any of these sexual activities.
Can you imagine, though, you go on Backpage looking for a sugar daddy and you end up in a basement? That's what the sugar daddy provides. But I'm guessing all these women, all these, I guess, quote unquote, eyewitnesses, they're all drug users, heavy drug users.
I don't know about that. That wasn't part of their testimony. And keep in mind, they weren't looking for a sugar daddy. They were looking for a female.
Right.
And they found Bailey, who then introduces them to Aubrey.
It's a bizarre story.
They will fall out of touch with most of them when because these arrangements, what happens is they start off soft and then they get worse and worse. They get a little more violent,
right,
more depraved. Bailey's essentially looking for a submissive. And so people who want to be a submissive show up, they meet Bailey, and now they're submitting to her. But now there's this other person involved. Shit went from weird to crazy, strange weird.
Might be fun for some people, but I think once that couple starts talking about that he can fly and that they want to murder somebody, you stop returning their texts and their calls.
Well, and mind you, this guy who claims he can fly is sitting in a wheelchair during the course of this trial. So
yeah,
appears he lost that ability.
That's because he flew too high and fell.
Yeah, well, but the purpose of calling
his legs on the landing.
The purpose of calling these witnesses was to point out that it's like what one of the one of the prosecutors were saying, it wasn't the Tinder communication with Sydney Loofe was completely targeting her and trying to set up a scenario where they could abduct, attack, and murder this woman. Before she became a victim, they were looking for a nameless victim. These women are testifying that these 2 were aroused by the idea of watching. So one of the statements was something to this effect here, Captain. Aubrey Trail was aroused by the idea of watching Bailey Boswell torture someone. Let's get into some of the details I don't want to go through all of it because it was very lengthy, but among some of the details of these witnesses in their testimony at trial, Aubrey and Bailey wanted one of the women to select someone to kill and torture so they could videotape the act and sell it. saying that they could make $1 million to sell the snuff film. They stated that Bailey wanted one of the women to torture and kill someone to prove her loyalty to Bailey in their dominant/submissive sexual relationship. The woman said the order was later dropped after she proved her worth. That each of the women were mostly met up with the pair, who mostly met up with the pair individually, was paid between $150 to $200 a week as some sort of allowance. But they said the payments came with a set of rules, including that Aubrey be called daddy and Bailey mommy, and remaining naked while they're in the apartment at all times, also participating in group sex sessions and submitting to punishment, including whippings. I forgot too. One of his other supernatural powers was he had the ability to put Bailey in a trance.
Sure.
One of the women testified that she had a fantasy of being a cat, complete with a leash and collar, but she said that she was humiliated when she was ordered to eat cat food out of a bowl.
But she wanted to be, wanted to be a cat.
Hey, you want to
be
talk
a cat? You got to eat the cat food.
You got to walk the walk.
What is wrong with people?
We don't have enough time. They also testified that Bailey enjoyed pain during sex and wanted one of the young women to talk about acts of torture while engaging in sex with her. Bailey, the woman testified, also talked of dismembering a body and breaking someone's fingers as a form of torture.
Jesus Christ.
And that Aubrey had what he called a kill bag that contained a hammer, pliers, and a sauna suit. Remember, there was a sauna suit found with the trash bags and body parts. One of the women who was with the couple on the failed cocaine drop in Grand Island, or we probably more, it's more accurate to say the fake cocaine drop when they were on the run, testified that Bailey
cocaine from the skies.
Testified that Bailey and Aubrey talked about being on the lookout for a victim to torture and kill, quote, someone who would not be missed. The plan was for Aubrey to watch Bailey and the woman commit murder. This, I don't know if I mentioned it already, Captain, but it sounds like they even may have had their eyes on a student or a foreign student. Think about this for a second here. Look, these two are not overly smart, but we do know that they're planning.
You don't need to be smart if you can fly.
They're planning all of this. If the family doesn't sound the alarm right away, if the friend doesn't turn into Adrian Monk and sort the whole thing out and figure out what's going on and supply the absolute best lead possible to police, if all these dominoes don't fall in this order, how soon would they have moved on to victim number 2?
And because the distance they lived away from Sydney, would they become suspects at all? Because since they were using fake names and they were basically catfishing on Tinder, just think if Sydney was in a place where she didn't tell anybody about a date, we would have no leads. And even the Snapchat picture, you could go, well, she said she's going on a date, but we don't know how she's getting dates. We don't know if she met somebody. And then again, they would, go to her inner circle and the people at her work, and they would have nowhere to go as far as information. She just poof, gone.
Well, and a lot of this too, I every bit of this, you could say, whoa, this powerful piece of evidence, there's so many incredibly powerful and significant pieces of evidence in this trial that were presented at the trial, but we can't overlook that they had video of the 3-hour FBI interrogation of Aubrey. This is shown, the entire session was shown to the jury. And remember, when it seems like at this point, his concern is not for himself. It's more of, well, Bailey's not guilty, wasn't there when Sydney died. His story is changing on the details of a lot of this relationship, right? At times saying that they had known Sydney for a long time. I think at one point he says they had known her for a year prior to the murder.
Yeah, but that doesn't line up with the surveillance footage at Menards, right?
Well, and it doesn't line. The other thing too is it doesn't line up with other stories he's telling as well.
Right.
So it's, I mean, which one would you like for me to believe, sir? You know, which of your stories most benefits you? What suits you today?
I hope somebody rips his face off in jail.
Regarding the missing organs, this part is weird because he's simply saying that they drained her blood. Remember, he said something like because he was thirsty that day.
Yeah.
But then he says that he deposited her blood and soul at a secret location. And that's about as much of that as we get. But he does say this too in one of the portions of being interrogated. He says, quote, "I'm a low down piece of shit, a monster, whatever, but I'm not giving anyone up."
Meaning that there's more people involved?
Look, Bailey's absolutely involved. I think he's just trying to protect her
Right.
in some form or fashion. But
look, there could be somebody else that was there. We know that they were doing stuff with other people. It's very possible that somebody else was there that didn't know what was going to go down.
Yeah, well, he says two other women were there.
Yeah.
But Bailey was outside, knocked out on drugs. But then he goes into this dissertation of his weird ass belief system where he was saying, look, when we disposed of the body, everyone who was there when Loofe died had to leave something they liked or something personal to them at the disposal site. And he said that this is some form of apology that they could give. But he also goes on several times to maintain that he alone was responsible for Sydney Loofe's death, and that Bailey Boswell was not present when Sydney died. And he claimed that Bailey Boswell was later forced to help cut up and dispose of the body. And look, his story's all over the place. First, she accidentally died during rough sex. Then he's claiming multiple people were involved, but not Bailey. She's innocent. Oh, but wait, she had helped, but only because he forced her to. He refused to name the other participants because they don't exist. At trial, Aubrey's story changed again. His court-appointed attorney, Joe Murray, asked jurors to keep an open mind. Even though Aubrey Trail is not a particularly nice man, he says, but the truth is that Sydney Loofe's death was completely accidental and not a premeditated scheme to kill a young woman. And just like you said, Captain, you're ahead of it here, because that doesn't go along with all of their actions and confirmed movements. Some of them, I mean, these are the trail. It's digital. It's on the phones. It's on communications between the killers, between the victim and one of the killers, and their actions and activities at these do-it-yourself stores.
Well, but you've been saying it for a long time, and I think it's one of the smartest things you've actually said, that this cell phone data will become just as important as DNA and a lot of these.
I think it's already more important. If the agencies that seem to know, the departments that seem to know how to use it and to use it immediately are clearing cases and making arrests very quickly. And those are stories that don't necessarily make it all the way to nationwide, because we're looking for the killer. Boom, we found him. And so the story doesn't have any legs because it's very quick that they find the person responsible and get them off of the streets. And it's all because of, you got this phone on you. And yeah, we don't need to go into too much detail about that.
So what happens to these asshats?
What I could take away from his trial, the trail trial, if you want to call it that, was that they were trying to push forward the idea that this was simply sex game gone wrong. And that, they went way over the top to try to cover it up. It's weird because Aubrey did testify. he says that he doesn't contest a lot of what the prosecution's case is. But he's saying, he had that explanation for what actually happened, sex game gone wrong. But then in this version of it, it's she was accidentally strangled from behind during three-way rough sex between him and Bailey and Sydney. So, it goes on and on and on. But again, it doesn't explain why you are purchasing things for a murder kit and to cover it up. Before Bailey and Sydney's date on the 15th, you're buying this stuff.
Right.
So you can't say, well, this was disposing of her body in this horrific, barbaric manner that we chose to do was reactionary to an accident. You don't plan an accident. You plan to cover something up. And everything that the state was showing proved, in my opinion, that. And the jury believed it as well. He was found guilty. The same jury was reconvened to consider whether Aubrey should be given the death penalty. This was like a short mini trial, if you will. They had to believe that there were aggravating circumstances involved here, in which, we've gone through a lot of the details here. You got to prove that it's premeditated, and you got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the murder manifested exceptional depravity by ordinary standards of morality and intelligence. That's the court jargon here, for the legal words here for this in their state. And of course, they unanimously voted for death. So in Nebraska, from my understanding here, Captain, you have the jury, they have to push for death, but then you have a 3-judge system. So if the jury finds that the crime met the criteria, then 3 judges would consider any mitigating circumstances and determine the actual final sentencing. So this is about as thorough as it gets, as far as I'm concerned. And so he faced the same jury twice, once to find if he's guilty, 2 to figure out if the circumstances met the criteria for the death penalty, and then 3, a 3-judge panel to confirm if that was going to be the punishment or not. And that's what he gets. Now, Bailey, unlike Aubrey, was completely different during her trial. She was silent during the pretrial period and silent and on her best behavior during the trial. But all of the same evidence that we covered in the trail trial is all that was presented at Bailey's trial as well. And the results here are same but different. The jury took just 3.5 hours to convict Bailey on all 3 charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and improper disposal of human remains. In the sentencing phase, going for the death penalty, the prosecutor showed the jury the severed arm, superficial cuts. They showed everything they could to point out that not just was this premeditated, it was exceptionally depraved.
One of the worst.
And that she was, here's the part of it. Like, you can have people that go on the stand and testify that because of violence that Bailey experienced in her life and trauma that she experienced in her life, that those are some form of mitigating factors that you need to consider. But you also need to consider this. She did a lot of the legwork to make sure that this woman was abducted and murdered. Had she not done a lot of that legwork, then this may have never happened. So she is found guilty. She doesn't get the death penalty because in this situation, the 3 judges, it's not majority rules. It's got to be unanimous. So 2 of the judges believed that the death penalty was appropriate and 1 did not. She doesn't get the death penalty. She gets life in prison, plus she gets like a 50 years for conspiracy charge and 2 years for unlawful disposal of human remains. Afterwards, we have Sydney's parents, George and Susie Loofe, said They were thankful that Bailey and Aubrey will never see the light of day. George Loofe added, however, that if this doesn't warrant the death penalty, I feel Nebraska should just get rid of it. I believe that Bailey Boswell is as guilty or guiltier. If it wasn't for her, my daughter would never have been there, he said. There were appeals by both individuals, but Nebraska Supreme Court affirmed the convictions, the death sentence, and the life sentence as well. Sydney Loofe was an animal lover. She aspired to work with creatures big and small. Memorial benches for Sydney can be found at her hometown city park and at the zoo and aquarium in Omaha. Her headstone is shaped like an angel. This is just another senseless killing. We suspect that Bailey and Aubrey, now facing the remainder of their sorry lives in prison cells, could not even articulate a reason why. Bailey was full of self-serving tears when it came to begging for her life. But where was that sympathy when it came to Sydney? As Bailey's family said about her, she was a normal kid. She had a loving upbringing. She was not raised to be a monster. She chose to help Aubrey find victims for their depraved fantasies involving sexual sadism. She chose to make others submit to her using coercion and violence. She chose to subject others to fear, pain, and debasement. She chose to kill, and therefore she chose her fate. As for Aubrey, he fostered a cult of personality with himself at the center and used fear, pain, and torture to subjugate women to his increasingly sadistic demands, which eventually culminated in murder. We will be watching to see whether Aubrey's death sentence is ever carried out. I cannot think of a much more deserving candidate.
I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the garage. Thanks for telling your mother. Thanks for telling your brother. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And Colonel, do we have any recommended reading for the beautiful listeners?
Yeah, one of our good friends is put out their first. I say first because I believe there's going to be a number 2 or a number 3 to come.
Some say this will be her first number 2.
There you go. Lauren Samples' true crime book, recently released, titled Through the Shadows, Unsolved Crimes and the Search for Truth. Many of you will know her from the Paradise After Dark podcast, people that have gone to CrimeCon have seen them on Creators Row, Podcast Row. And it's complete with some essays one by yours truly, also one by Sharon Newman Edwards, Robin Warder, and Kelly Brink. So check that out. The reviews are really good on Amazon right now. The title is Through the Shadows, Unsolved Crimes and the Search for Truth by Lauren Samples. You can find that title and many other great recommendations on our recommended page at truecrimegarage.com.
And until next week, be good, be kind, and don't litter.